One of the funny stories I have with Paul is when he first got his electric car. Drove it to Rafferty's, and we went outside, looked at it, and he was telling me how quiet it was. He's like, "You don't even know it's running. It's so nice." And so he came in the next day. He goes, "You know what, Kendra? Yesterday, I forgot to turn the car off. I thought I turned it off. Maybe the entire time I've been in there eating."
I walked past and I saw him every day, and he stopped me one day and told me that my red hair reminded him of his daughter, and he just had so many great things to say about her and everything. And from that moment, he asked me what my name was, which is Julia, and from then on, he called me Robert because of Julia Roberts. Not Robert, Robert. So every time somebody new would be sitting with him or a table, he'd be like, "Hey, Robert," and everyone would be like, "Her name's Rob." Like, what?
I have to say, even the kids that came in to eat at Rafferty's, every Christmas, they thought Paul was Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Yes. And I remember the first time it happened, I just started dying laughing. Like, I see the 2 or 3 kids just lined up, and he's sitting at the actual bar top that day because none of the other guys could come in. And these kids are just lined up, and I'm just standing back there just watching, and Paul just picks up. I was like, "What do you want for Christmas?" Just went along with it. And after they walked away, I was like, "Paul, what just happened?" And he's like, "Oh, they thought I was Santa Claus." I said, "You didn't tell them otherwise, did you?" He said, "Oh, no." He said, "I wasn't going to break their hearts." He said, "It happens all the time, Casey." I'm like, that is just great.
Paul did a lot of my son's games. He would take a lot of pictures, track meets, football games, whatever Cameron was doing, but he always talked about how little Cameron's legs were. He said he was at the horse track betting on horses, and he said there was one horse that came through, and he had the skinniest little legs that reminded him of Cameron. And he said, so I bet on that one. He's like, it wasn't supposed to win or anything. He said, so I put some money on that horse, and he said, it won.
He had his palmetto. We named a side dish after him. He had his own dish. And there was a couple other guests that actually were regulars that would come in and say, give me one of those palmettos. So they wanted that too. Wasn't really anything to it, just cottage cheese and tomatoes.
And his shepherd's pie, the soup of the day on
homemade
top
shepherd's
of the mashed
pie. He would
potatoes.
mix it up himself at the table with ingredients. And, when you eat there every day, I guess you get a little burnout, so you get creative. So, you know.
I can't tell how many times he came in, and I'm like, "Paul, what do you have today?" He said, "I don't know, tell me, what am I having?"
Yeah.
And we would pick for him.
With his Texas toast. One time, my nephew, who lives in Louisville, had a soccer tournament in Bowling Green. Paul didn't know who he was, didn't even know that it was my nephew or anything. I told him about it when I was waiting on him. He was like, oh, I actually took some pictures. And he was asking what field he was on, and I told him. And I pointed out my nephew in one of the pictures, and he sent me about 20 pictures of him. Didn't even know who he was, didn't know he was related to me, but he had those pictures.
He'd be one of my last guests at closing, especially Friday, Saturday nights after games, because that was to be the second time he come in for the day, and that was some of the best parts of the night, was just having that time to, when nothing else was going on, you'd actually be able to sit down and have a conversation with him, and we'd go through all the pictures that he'd just taken at the game, and that was when he would usually, if Roxanne had cooked dinner, he didn't get food, he would just get his apple walnut crunch, or his banana cream pie, or a scoop of ice cream, but he always had dessert when he came in at night, and going through all the pictures he'd just taken for the entire day. And I remember one story that he told about a girl that had won her, what do you call it, for this prom, not prom, the
Homecoming queen or
homecoming
something?
queen, yes. Did he tell you that story?
Not sure which one.
It was a girl who had lost every bit of her family, and she was mentally disabled, and such a sweet girl, and she had lost every bit of her family, and had a rough time in school, and that year something had turned around, and she had won homecoming queen, and I have never seen Paul break down and cry, except for that night after that game. And when he was telling me that story, he could barely even get the story out of his mouth because he was in such tears, and had a letter that they had found from her grandmother or something that had been gone for years, and it was such a beautiful story, but I've never seen Paul so emotional. He cared. He's different than most photographers. He cared.
Well, I probably know Paul longer than any of y'all. We went to Western together. He was a basketball manager when I was down there. And we hung around a little bit. And he was a really good softball player. He played third base. didn't run real fast, but he had really good hands and he could hit the ball. But I remember playing over in a tournament at Lampkin Park, and they were playing before us. And I went to saw him and hollered at him, and we used to always wear tennis shoes to the game, and so we could wear our spikes when we played. And he came out after his game, got ready to leave, and looked over to get his tennis shoes, and somebody had stolen them. And Paul said, "Yeah, I really don't mind. If they need them, it's not a big deal, but I don't think it's going to do them much good because one of them's a size 9 and the other one's a size 11. And he just laughed about it, And after I left and then came back after 20-some years and saw him down here, and it looked just like he did, except he was a lot whiter. I remember we got on that road when we was in all those games, and I started, at the end of one of the games, we was way ahead. And I started that old Dandy Don Meredith song, "Turn Out the Lights, the Party's Over." So after every game, he would come over on the side of his camera and sing it, Coach. We went 44 in a row. And that's just some of the things I remember about him, but he's a great guy.
So I coached softball my first year, and some of our starters were 7th graders. And so we're front tossing. I'm in the cage, and I'm front tossing, and they're like, "Don't you want a net?" And I'm like, "They're just 7th graders. I don't need a net." So I've got my glove, and I'm front tossing to these girls, and they're hitting the ball in the net. And I'm catching them, and one of the girls gets up, and she's got a pretty good bat, and I throw her a ball, and she drills me in the leg. And I got a huge goose egg, and I run into Paul, and I'm limping. He's like, "What's the matter?" And I'm like, "Man, one of the girls hit me with a ball." And he's like, "Come over to the office and I'll take care of it." So I come over here, and he's like, "What were you doing?" And I'm like, "I was front tossing." He's like, "Don't you use a net?" And I'm like, "Well, I didn't think I need one." He's like, "You big dummy, that net is there to protect you. Use the net." And I'm like, "Man, I need to, don't I?" And so he fixes me all up, and I'm like, "What do I owe you, Paul?" And he said, "Anybody that dumb, I'm not even going to charge you." I'm like, "Thank you for that."
One of my son's game, who played quarterback for Centre College, and it was at Sewanee, and it was a beautiful day in October. The trees were turning, and it was just a beautiful setting. So after the game, Paul had got his equipment, and he's walking across the field, and these 2 ladies come up to him, and one of them asked Paul if he was with Centre, but I guess Paul heard, "Are you a center?" And Paul looked at the lady and said, "Well, ma'am, I do the best I can." And the lady with her said, no, not center. Are you with Centre?" And Paul said, he posted, and he said, "Well, as Junior Hayes always says, that's how rumors get started." And he's a guy that can never be replaced, and it's more than the photographs that he did.
So we started in, and my wife coached cheer, and Katie cheered, and so Paul started coming in and taking pictures. And there's no telling where he would end up. He would end up on the top of the bleachers in the small gym, or up in the rafters in the arena, or shooting pictures, throughout the years at football. He'd be laying under the stadium or laying next to a car, and you always wonder, like, what's he doing? Like, what is he doing? And it always turned out, just perfect. And he knew exactly what he was doing, and we jokingly called him Waldo because we always want to know where he was going to be next.
Yeah, I'm going to miss the late night text, I'm up during huddle, and then Paul will send me a picture of, throughout the game or something I did, or maybe the year that I fell on the sideline, and I did that a bunch there. And Paul always documented all that stuff. And I enjoyed the road trips that he took with us, especially the Marshall County trip where we saw those
The fish.
the huge fish.
That's right, the
Yeah,
fish.
it's
I
at the
remember
catfish
that.
At the
Yes.
catfish
Yeah.
place in Marshall County, and that was
Yeah.
something that I enjoyed. Paul taking pictures of us down there because it's been fun, and Paul was a person you can always count on.
Well, Amy and I were fortunate enough years ago when Trent Stillman was playing quarterback at Army to meet Paul here at 4 in the morning, and begin a long journey up to West Point to watch Trent's Army team play Jared Carpenter's Northwestern team. Long travel day, afternoon game, a beautiful day. Paul, of course, is on the field, taking great pictures, as he always did. And this went late into the night. So at some point around 1 or 2, we load up in our rental car. Paul's driving, and I'm the navigator, is what he told me, with his iPad. And we're going to navigate to our Hampton Inn. Well, the navigator was tired and fell asleep, and Paul, being the nice guy he was, just kind of let me sleep. But before long, he tapped me and said, Coach Spader, I'm not sure where our hotel is, but if you look up at those lights ahead, that's Manhattan. I said, oh, dear Lord, Paul, please turn this car around. We're not staying anywhere near Manhattan. We were close to campus. But many times when he'd greet me, he'd say, you haven't seen the lights of Manhattan, have you, Spader? Always reminded me, but as all of these guys have said, that's just his way. He always connected with you as soon as he saw you.
Boys, y'all about ready for my song?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's hear it.
That's my Turn Out the Lights. Turn out the lights, party's over. They say that all good things must end. Call it a night, the party's over. But someday we'll see Paul Gray again.
Amen.
Way down in Bowling Green, prettiest girls I've ever seen. A man in Kentucky sure is lucky to love down in Bowling Green. Bowling Green folks treat you.
My name's Emily. My nickname was Sunny, but I think I'm the only employee whose nickname never stuck, so I was M or Miss M.
I'm Tiffany, and I was always T.
My name's Katie, but my dad always called me Bug, or Bugger, or Katie Bug. Lonnie still calls me Katie Bug.
I do. Lonnie, and somehow ended up with Larry. Still don't really know why, but I'm Larry. What was Paige's?
Paige is Jack.
Paige was Jack, because he thought Paige is my sister, but he thought she looked like Jacqueline Kennedy, so he called her Jack, which I guess is also not feminine.
And then we got another Paige, and her name was Jill.
My name is Casey, and I was Louis, Louie, or Lou.
This was like one of my first real jobs, and I mean, you just dove right in. There was no breaks, you know, like you were exhausted by the end of the day, but Paul taught me how to work hard.
You had to problem solve and be fast on your feet here, and I think that was a big thing, but otherwise I think that, like, it was just like a unique, very strong learning format for teamwork.
You'd hear one story in the morning, you'd hear the same story in the afternoon,
and every time
and then you would hear the same story at home. And I'm like, by the end of it, I'm like,
There, every Christmas, he would take us for a Christmas dinner. And leading up to this particular Christmas, he asked me where we wanted to go for dinner. And we always picked Olive Garden. And one year, I think I was just, joking around, and I was like, Olive Garden, Times Square. And he made it happen.
We went to West Point anticipating to watch Trent Stillman play football. Sorry, Trent. We did not watch any of the games.
It was like a historic
blizzard.
It was Halloween.
Yeah,
because everybody was dressed up.
We just had on like jeans and a light coat, and we were not prepared for a blizzard. And all of a sudden, it just starts snowing, and we were standing there like, okay. Paul gets ready, and it just keeps snowing. And everyone at the tailgate was nice enough to give us some ponchos, which was later destroyed. Don't get too close to a kerosene heater.
Oh no!
Because it just basically shrivels up in your face.
It was like.
Yeah, like within seconds, it was gone. So, but Paul is down on the sidelines taking pictures, and I mean the pictures of the field, it is completely covered. Like with every couple of plays, they would go and have to shovel the lines on the field because there was so much snow. And Paul he didn't even have a hood. Like, he was in just his, I think it was like his Bowling Green zip-up jacket with a couple layers and his white tennis shoes that he always wore and his khakis and all of his camera gear. And he comes back up, I think a little bit before the game was over, and he is just basically a walking, like, I'm blanking on the...
Snowman? Or...
Abominable
Yes.
snowman?
Like an abominable snowman. His beard is just covered in snow, and he did not complain once.
And I think that Paul's like, all he wanted to do was make things happen that you could never make happen.
I'm in physical therapy now. I'm a physical therapist, and I'm a director of a clinic called Physical Dizziness Fall and Prevention Centers in Owensboro, and I took so much from what I learned at Paul's. It's like if I can do anything, I may not be able to fix them, but if I can give them compassion and try to pick their day up like Paul did, even if he was having a bad day, nobody else knew. I mean, sometimes we could tell if he got to bed late or was doing paperwork at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Which he did a lot.
Yeah, and we had to call him at 8 or 9 and say, hey, Paul, you coming? But he let everybody have a good time. He made them feel special.
I ended up doing nursing, and now I'm in sales for medical devices, and we actually share some patients, and so he and I have communicated even up until last week about some people. And you know, like, what I want to say is that, you know, like, I learned from Paul how not to see someone as a diagnosis or an injury. I learned how to see Paul, or how to see patients from Paul as that person.
I'm in Nashville now, and I work for a development firm who also does design, and so I'm an architect there. I'm a project manager, and actually recently I got switched kind of over into healthcare architecture. So I design some dialysis clinics, and right now I'm working on a multidisciplinary clinic for Vanderbilt.
So I live in Cleveland now. I'm an occupational therapist, and I would say it's every day, especially since I heard this, takes me back to just day one here.
You can
move on if you want.
He's just such a good man.
My entire life, and while I was working here, I got close with Paul because I found out that he had the same hobbies, but we both love to write and we both love to create. Obviously everyone knows that now about Paul with his photography and his videography, but his words are very strong as well too. A lot of people don't really get to see that side of him, but he's very profound. And so anyways, while I was doing all the childcare stuff, I was still writing and working on different ventures while I was here, and so weirdly enough, it's come full circle, and now I'm solely focusing on writing, and I'm doing a lot of ghostwriting and running different accounts for some different clients. But Paul and I actually had a lot of on the DL projects that we've been working on. So we'll see how that plays out, but definitely there'll be something coming out of it there that kind of ties all this back together. But we have been working on a book called Where They Call Me Lou.
Yeah. Here we are.
Here we are. This is where they call me Lou. Here we are.
My dad thought the world of the girls that worked for him. They were a second family. I mean, I had babysitters, I had friends. I absolutely loved it. And then you got Izzy and Woody, and I know Holly just started working as well. And I think Michaela, she worked for him for a semester. I mean, there's been so many people, and also like. Not all of the girls are in this video, and I really wish we could get them all in. There's like 20, 24, something like that. But I mean, Emily Hammonds and Tiffany Bryant, and I'm
Ashley Hill.
Ashley Hill. One of his favorite things that I always said, and it was since I was a kid, was if he ever did anything for me, whether it was, I don't know, giving me a Christmas present or just coming down to Nashville and buying me dinner, I would always end it with, "Thank you, Daddy." I really loved that.
I think we need to put it, probably the relationship between Paul Gray and the Stillmans, or he liked to call us the Griswolds. I don't know why, but he did. But to put it into context, probably at least 2 decades ago, Paul started doing physical therapy. Trish is a runner, of course, and run multiple marathons, but Paul started doing physical therapy on her because she had knee problems, and that led to a knee replacement. The doctor told her not to run after that, but she kept on, and she would run, and Paul would fix her. She would run again, and Paul would fix her, and that went on for 20 years, and he was still fixing her up until the day he died.
You saw how many problems she had.
Part of those 20 years, I was in high school and college, so it spanned 8 years. And Mom
You were in
lived
college
here.
for 8 years?
High school and college. High school
College.
and college. No, I'm going to tell my story.
Okay, my bad.
Mom lived here. So, me being the hungry girl that I was, about 4:30 every day, I always knew where to find Mom. It was at Paul's. So, routinely, I would call, and Mom...
Daily.
Yeah, and Paul didn't even have to look at the caller ID. He would just answer, and he would say, "Hey, Whit, hold on a second. Trish, what's for dinner? It's Whitney."
When Trent went off to West Point, you know, Paul thought that was the biggest thing. I mean, he would leave at, you know, do a game till 2:30 in the morning, and he would
At Bowling Green
at
High.
Bowling Green High, and then he'd fly out the next morning with me or Mom or somebody else at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And boy, did we have some stories. When the funniest story, you know, had to be the shoe story.
There's a lot of fun.
You know, we would always tailgate after the games, and you know, Paul would always walk up late because he would try to get these, you know, last shots, or you know, Trent coming out of the locker room or something like that. And you know, he always came back up to the tailgate, and he usually do his "What's happening?" You know, and he came back up to the tailgate all kind of somber and sad, and I looked at him, I'm like, "Paul, you know, what's the matter?" He said, "Man, somebody stole my extra pair of shoes." And I'm like, he goes, "What would anybody need with a size 8 and a size 10? He said, "Man, isn't that guy going to get a surprise?" Oh, we were dying laughing. I was like, I can't believe somebody had stolen his shoes.
The first time at West Point, when I was a freshman there, our media guy comes up to me. He said, "Trent, there's a guy out there.
Who this guy
I
is?
don't know. He might be a fan. He might be a photographer. Heck, he might even be homeless. But he wants you." I said, "Long gray hair, big beard, hat, camera." He's like, "Man, that's just Paul. Let him on back there. He's harmless."
But Paul it was the first Army-Navy experience, but it was at the prep school. Army prep played Navy prep. It was the only one Trent ever won. But we killed him.
Sorry, Paul.
But we killed him.
He said, "I'm flying into Philadelphia Saturday morning, and I'm going to rent a car, and I'm going to drive to Fort Monmouth to the prep school, and I don't know what time I'll get there, but can you get somebody to leave me a pass?" And I said, "Sure." So I talked to Trent.
And we didn't know it was the ultimate high security
security. You have to understand, at this point, Paul had started letting his hair grow out until Bowling Green won the state championship. And as we know, Trent, I'm sorry. It was a long, dry spell.
We made it all the way.
We kissed our sister a lot of times.
Yeah. So Paul's hair was like out to here, you know. So homeless, yeah, homeless. So we had gotten to the game, and we were sitting in the stands, you know, and they were warming up, and get this phone call from Paul, and he said, "I'm here. I'm at the gate, but they won't let me in." I said, "Okay." So I got a hold of Coach Cook, and he said, "Okay, I'll get the golf cart and I'll drive up and pick up Paul." Well, that day, and Paul tells this story too, it was really windy, like really windy. So when Paul was out the gate. His hair was like out the ear.
He had a fro.
He had a fro. His beard was here. All this camera stuff, and the guards like looking at
And the
him.
guy's in a Spartan military outfit.
So he said, Coach Cook comes to pick him up. You know, he's looking, and the security guy walks up to Paul and he said, "If you get more than 3 feet away from Coach Cook, your family and your friends will never see you again." So the whole time, you know, Coach Cook.
And he took him serious.
Coach Cook
He
was
was like
like,
this.
Paul would be right here. Coach Cook go this way, Paul would be right there. He's like, I'm watching going on down the sideline. But the funniest part was at halftime, Coach Cook goes across the field to go to the locker room, and here goes Paul right behind him.
Paul was
Limping
part
his
of our
way.
halftime adjustment.
Yeah.
Paul, you got any input?
His presence was so strong up there, as it is here, and for this community. I mean, people.
But he touched everybody.
Yeah, he just had
That's where I was going, is that, you know, we laugh and we joke about Paul, but he was totally selfless.
Mhm.
Like, the amount of time that he put in just for Trent, you know, he was instrumental in helping him get a college scholarship, and he's successful today in large part because of Paul. I mean, there was a story that I was going to tell. My mom, as you can see, is rather persistent. There was a Christmas where we were all together, and literally it was 10 or 20 degrees below zero, and she wanted a family photo. And it had to be insisted we had. We all, every one of us was like, no, it's too cold. Let's wait.
The wind was blowing.
The wind was blowing
Sucks
like
out there.
40-mile-an-hour gusts. Let's go down to the square and let's take a family picture. So
Worst
who do we
family
call?
photo.
Who do we call? We call
I don't
Paul.
think I was smiling.
Paul's like, oh yeah, we'll come over there. We'll do it. Yeah. So he meets us down there, and we're literally all in a huddle, like penguins
Jada,
in
was
the
it-
Antarctic.
Jada
He's saying, smile, everybody.
He's like, smile, everybody. We're all like, you know, just shivering to death.
And the wind is all in our face. There was
it's-
not one
My
good
3
photo.
hairs were sticking straight up.
It was
Two,
absolutely miserable.
Even the dog was miserable.
But
I
it's-
know.
you know, you talk about that, and you know, the way he made our family feel welcome. You could probably go to countless people in a community, and he made the same families feel the same way.
Right.
And you know, that's just who he was. I mean, that's the legacy that he left. He made everybody feel welcome. He captured the best moments of people's time and time that they can't get back.
I basically grew up here. I mean, oh gosh, I can't. Every time I walked in this office, I felt like I was getting in trouble. I felt like I was losing something, breaking something in his equipment. Something was going wrong. And one story that really points out is his dang candy jar. He has a giant candy jar over there. I mean, it's always filled up. And one day I was like 8. I came in, he's like, take as much as you like. Well, my 8-year-old mind is like, I'll take the whole thing. And I swear I got halfway down, and Trish went to the bathroom. She was doing something, and Paul looks at her and goes, Kylie, did you eat that whole jar? And he looks over and he looks at her again. He's like, you better clean that up before Trish gets in here. And he goes, I won't tell her if you clean it up. And I was hurrying up, and I threw it all in the trash can. There was like a mound of candy wrappers. And for that day, he never told anybody. It was always between me and him.
That's right. 'Cause I never heard that.
No, I
story.
told it on the way here, and I remember this equipment. I don't know if you can see it, but one day I was trying to show off. I was like, I'm pretty strong. I put some weights on the sides, and you push it up with your legs. Well, I wasn't that strong as I thought I was, and I got stuck. And I literally could not move. My legs were stuck, and I go, Paul! Paul! And he comes running in like he's panicking. He's like, what, Kylie? And I go, I'm stuck. I can't get out. And he gets it all. He's like, what am I going to do with you? I'm like, I don't know. And by that point, his gray hairs were sticking out. I mean, they were as long as mine.
Throughout every single game of my 4 years, he was the first guy I always saw. He heard a lot of things that he probably shouldn't have heard. He saw a lot of things that he probably shouldn't have saw. But I just remember a couple stories. We always met with a sports psychologist, and we had this thing after every play, we clear low target, and I remember just speaking on that comforting thing is that part of my mind reset after a play is I'd look over there at Paul. Paul was just a little piece of home. So no matter what happened, good or bad, Paul was standing right there. and he'd help me reset my mind. And if it was good, he'd give me the old corny thumbs up. If it was bad, he'd give me the old corny thumbs down. But just to really cap off my 4 years playing at West Point, it all came down to that final drive. And when we had fumbled heading in the score to take the lead on Navy.
With no time left.
With no time left. Who was right there? Paul. And that's what he reflected to everybody in this community, especially to our family. And I just remember I got off one knee, I look over at Paul, and he points at his chin, and he gives the old thumbs up, like, keep your chin up. And
that's who he was.
And that's who Paul was.
I think and I can speak for every single person here, one of the most important things that Paul ever photographed was Kylie's baptism.
Yeah.
In the river.
Mm-hmm. Just ran my 80th marathon. I'm shooting for 100, and so Paul's been counting with me all these years, and he said, I'm going to be there when you run your 100th marathon, and I'm going to take pictures. And I told Bob the other day, I said, I got 20 more to go, but I said whether I run, I jog, I walk, or I crawl, I'm going to finish it for Paul. And I am. I've got my motivation.
You don't have to worry about that, Paul. She'll run them next week.
I know. But I'm going to get those last 20 in for Paul.
Chasing our fear, some kind of trouble is coming. We don't know when, we don't know what. I will stand by you, brother, till the daylight comes, or I'm dead and gone.
Paul and I grew up in southeastern Shelby County as big buddies, and we've been best friends ever since then, and done we've had many adventures through the years. And one of the things I was going to mention is Don Williams has got a song about a country boy, and there's nowhere you couldn't go with a .22 rifle and a fishing pole. And that's kind of the way Paul and I were. We'd leave at daylight and get back at dark, and we'd either be hunting or fishing or playing baseball somewhere.
We played a lot of baseball in your side yard there for a long time.
That's right.
So we played ball one day, he slides into third, and I tagged him, and he says I broke his leg. And I said he was out, and he said he was safe. But we still disagreed on the out or safe call. But he did. He said, you broke my leg. It's broke. And I said, no, it's not broke. Get up. He never put any weight on that leg, and that was his leg with polio. So he was, the doctor said it was a good thing he didn't put any weight on it, so it was able to be cast and healed properly. But we had a lot of fun playing ball in that side yard. We broke many windows out of that store that we had to pay Mr. Catlett to replace. Mom and Dad had to pay for a lot of them. So yes, we had a great time playing ball a lot of times, Tony.
He was about 17 and I was about 16, and I'd been sick for about a week. So we hadn't been able to do too much. He said, I think I'm going to hitchhike to Florida. I don't know if you remember him doing that, but
I don't remember this one.
But he had $50 is all he had, and he said, I'm going to go to Florida and I'm going to stay 3 days. So he hitchhiked a ride to Florida, stayed 2 or 3 days, and came back, 2 or 3 days later after he'd done that, hitchhiked all the way down, all the way back. He had a great experience, he said.
He always talked about him hitchhiking. He would always tell me stories about it, like whenever he would hitchhike from Western.
He took off on a motorcycle and went to California and back by himself. Camped out. But the best part of that was when he needed a shower, he'd wait till he'd see somebody check out of a motel. And when they were gone and the door was open, he'd go in and take a shower and clean up. So I don't know.
Growing up, he would always be like, Katie, you're a pretty
cute kid, but when I was your age, I was cuter. And then he told me that constantly. And then there was one story that he loved telling, especially telling the girls that work here, where he was at Western, and he went into class one day, and there was a test that he thought was like the next day, so he hadn't studied or anything, and he hears the teacher coming down the hall, so he jumped out their window to miss the test. And that lady was a patient like 2 years later after he had told us all this. And
did he tell her the story?
Yeah, he told her, and she was just laughing.
Good.
So, but I just love that. Cause
Do you know how close he came to not being a physical therapist?
No.
We, my mom's aunt, and back then she was Aunt Sarah, lived in New Jersey. She lived at Princeton, New Jersey, and her husband was the chairman of the history department at Princeton University. And my mom had written a letter to her about Paul going into physical therapy. And she didn't think that was appropriate. She summoned Paul to Princeton to tell him he was not going to be a physical therapist. He was going to go to medical school. He was going to be a doctor. And Aunt Sarah was a little eccentric. First of all, when he got there, his hair was too long. Imagine that. And she sent him down to get a haircut. I think he went back 2 or 3 times before she was finally satisfied with his haircut. And of course he wanted to play ball. He was on a college campus, he wanted to play basketball or something. So he told her he wanted to play basketball. So she called up the athletic department. And she didn't arrange for him to play ball, she arranged for him to get a tour of the athletic facilities, is what he found out.
I remember this story.
So he goes, meets, and there's a little co-ed that's going to show him around campus, and she starts showing him around, and Paul's being polite and everything. And finally, says, he saw the gym and saw people were in there playing basketball. And he said, somehow he figured out how to ditch her, got away from her. And he goes back to the gym, goes in a window, gets into the locker room and goes upstairs to where they're playing pickup basketball. And then he gets in a game very soon, a 3-on-3 game, and he comes down with the rebound, and he turns around with an elbow and hits some student right in the mouth. He said, teeth start going everywhere, blood's flying. He's thinking, wait a minute, I'm not a student here. I'm not supposed to be in here. So he said, while they were all in the commotion, he exited, went back to the locker room and out the window and left. So he said, somewhere there's a Princeton University graduate that's wondering who in the world would hit him in the mouth and broke his teeth out. He never went to med school, and thank goodness he became a physical therapist.
My mom wanted, she couldn't be in this video, but she wanted me to say that whenever Granny Sarah, Ural's mom, was diagnosed with cancer, he called her every single night. So it actually started with Granny Sarah,
It did.
and
Yep.
then she passed away, and he called Granddaddy Ralph.
He called Daddy every night. And, of course, I think I tried to, but he was probably better at it than I was.
I mean, seriously, without fail, I would be in their bedroom, and he would just be like, oh, it's time to call Granddaddy.
I would say he could run for mayor of Bowling Green. I think he could win.
Well, let me tell you something. On the way down here, I was talking to Sheriff Peter Gaines, which is a friend of mine, and he's a good friend of Paul's too. And he told me one time that he never want Paul Gray to run against him because he knew a whole lot more people than he did.
I think that's probably true, no doubt about it. But Bowling Green's such a great place, and he's made. He asked me to come down here about 5 years ago, and asked me to take pictures at ball games to keep me busy. And I knew what he was doing, but it was been a great experience for me to be standing on the sidelines, taking pictures, helping Paul out with that. I finally got to the point I said, Paul, I cannot keep up with that schedule you run.
Thanks for all the adventures that we had together, Paul. Never let those adventures fade, and even when we were adults, we had a lot of adventures together. He was like Peter Pan. We did what you always wanted to do, and we always made it fun. So that was really, really made life great for us. Now that you're on the biggest venture yet, racing heaven's hills on your bike, building a glorious home for your family, and taking pictures of the most notable thoroughbreds, I know heaven's doors welcomed you home, friend. Someday we will go fishing in wide open spaces again. And buddy, we won't have to worry about getting home before dark.
It's, you know, I thought all the way down here today of lots of different things, and just the fact that Paul was my brother, and I'm proud of him. I really am proud to have been his brother.
So, my dad and I, we had such a great relationship. We were best friends, and he would text me almost every day. And for the last couple of days, I found out he would text a lot of the same things to other people too. But one of the last things that he texted me was he loved quotes, and he especially loved Forrest Gump. And one of the last things that he texted me was, and I don't know why he texted it, was, "I'm tired now. I think I'll go home." And now he is.